Hello and welcome to our webinar Identity Under Attack, how to build a resilient zero trust strategy. I would like to welcome Roger into to that webinar, who will discuss this very exciting topic of identity under attack together with me. Roger, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you, Andre. Happy to. Welcome, everybody. I'm Chief Security Advisor, Customer Security Officer, however you call it. I think I do the same job since about 6 years and kind of get changing titles. At Microsoft, I cover with two colleagues the DACH region, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and typically on a more strategic level when it comes to security. I do security since ever. I recently calculated January, I think 10th next year is my 10,000th day in security. So I'm that old. I was CISO myself during my career, so I kind of saw a lot in that time.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'm Andre, CTO of IC Consult, now for 21 years in the identity space. And with IC Consult, so very few information about us before we start. So we are focusing on identity and access management, and identity resilience, identity security, everything related to identity, with more than 850 employees around the globe, and are focusing on all aspects of the project lifecycle when it comes to do identity security. And with that, I want to start talking about a very exciting topic, and this is, of course, Taylor Swift, and the impact Taylor Swift has on the identity industry. So, if we look to data breaches, identity data breaches over the last years, there's one interesting development. In the past, a lot of data breaches were caused by, I would say, somehow poor security, but that changed a lot. And nowadays, we are facing the situation that a lot of identity breaches are not part of weak configurations, but no, there was no kind of mistake, but really sophisticated attacks running against the repositories. And if you now look to the top right corner, there's Ticketmaster and, of course, Taylor Swift. I think you heard about what was happening last year. Let's have a short look on that, because it's, I think, the topics that affecting all of us being a part of the security industry. So because what was happening there was somehow typical. So it was all started with identity theft, and not with an employee of Ticketmaster. No, it was a contractor working in some way for Ticketmaster, and not on systems directly operated by Ticketmaster. No, it was a SaaS service, in that case, Snowflake, yeah, with a weaker security configurations. And that was then, ended up in a result you very likely heard about. So more than 500 million user records have been exposed, were for sale on the darknet, and the consequences of that attack were really had a strong impact. So one was that the digital tickets has been exposed, but I think more or the even worse outcome was that based on these user records, all these customers are somehow in danger of an identity theft, and therefore Ticketmaster were, for instance, paying identity monitoring services for the clients, at least in the US. So the two important aspects here I would like to highlight is, first of all, external users affected, external SaaS affected, and that leads me to the second point, and this is attackers are nowadays focusing massively on the identity layer. And I would like to bring up a second example here. Likely you heard about that, beginning of this year. So developers of Google Chrome extensions were heavily attacked. And the attacker were able to compromise a couple of these accounts, and we're now using the access to the code repositories to bring in harmful code into Chrome extensions. What is the thing about these kind of attacks? So first of all, inside the browser, that's a perfect place to access all kind of sessions. Cookies, access token, refresh token, everything what is exposed to the browser, of course also passwords and these kind of things. So, but based on the issued session for the attackers, it was quite easy to bypass, for instance, MFA, because the session is taken after the victim successful answered the MFA challenge. And the other thing is the Chrome extension was not detected as harmful code. So they were also able to bypass most of the endpoint protection solutions that were just not aware that there's malicious code inside that typically a very proper Chrome extension. And in that case, the victim could not do anything, and also for an organization it's very, very hard to protect against that kind of attacks, again, based on a vulnerability happening at a third party, so somewhere down the digital supply chain. I would like to cover very, very short two frameworks that help to navigate a little bit, and will provide a structure on a discussion we will later have. And these are two topics I'm quite sure most of you are very familiar with. One is the cybersecurity framework, covering different phases of identification of threats, understanding of attack surface, and so on. Protection, everything to really prevent an attack. Then detection, so if the attacker is able to move forward, then that you as an organization are able to detect that and respond to that, so stopping the attacker, and at the end of the day, able to recover successfully after an attack. And the second topic is zero trust. There's the pillars around zero trust, identity, devices, networks, and so on, providing you the kind of foundation to assess the level of maturity that you have when it comes to zero trust. So now, if you combine these two topics, you end up in a matrix like that that helps to navigate and understand what do we have in place, for instance, when it comes to protection on the device layer, or to detect an attack on the network layer, or to respond on that on the identity layer. Before we look into how we can structure and move forward to really provide steps to increase our identity security posture, our identity resilience, I would like to hand over to Roger to guide us through the zero trust implementation that Microsoft did.
Thank you, Andre. It's kind of interesting that NIST, which you just showed, actually has, I think they call it a standard, a guideline, a framework, however, describing zero trust. We are building and working closely together with the Open Group, which does something similar. So it's interesting to see where zero trust actually moved. I had 2 calls this week. Well, I have more than 2 calls this week, but 2 of them were kind of circling around zero trust. And one customer told me in a one-on-one, I kind of sick with zero trust. Everybody talks about it, and somehow nobody really drives it deeper. So we're coming back to that. And the other one was that was kind of a shocking one. Well, we now have a Zscaler in place, so we are done with zero trust, which is not our view. So let me pull you into what we did at Microsoft. And let me take a step back. There are a few things which I feel is that they are important for you to actually understand when you look at Microsoft IT. What I'm showing you here is a presentation which is not polished by marketing. It's a presentation by MSIT, so our internal IT. And our internal IT doesn't have to use Microsoft technology to protect Microsoft. So basically, they use the technology they feel best suited to actually protect our estate. Now, we did a vendor consolidation. We started it about 10 years ago, and that you then consolidate towards the Microsoft platform is probably an obvious one. The last step I've seen was when we actually replaced Sophos on the mobile phone with Defender for Endpoint, probably about 2 years ago. The other point, which is important to mention as well when we talk about those things, a lot of customers I talk to about, how we do security all up, feel that Microsoft has an extremely homogeneous network. Everything Windows 11, everything the same setup. Uh, Sorry to disappoint you. On the one hand side, we are still the biggest Mac development or Apple development shop globally. So you might use, and Andre, I've seen before, it just seen when we had the prep, you're working on a Mac, you're using Office on a Mac. So that's still something we obviously do. You can have a Mac internally if you want. I can internally actually order a Mac. I even get a discount at the local Mac store, by the way. We have a huge Linux population. We run GitHub, we run LinkedIn, we have Linux kernel developers. So that's the non-Microsoft side. On the Microsoft side, we have all the technologies in place, which we still support. So everything we shipped in the last at least 10 years, plus everything we do not support yet. So my machine is running on a pre-build of Windows, it's running on a pre-build of Teams, and so on and so forth. So we have a fairly heterogeneous environment and a lot of engineers working in there who know everything better anyway. So back in the day, we did a lot of, well, trials, if you want, or we have a long journey protecting identities. When I joined Microsoft the first time, that was around 2002, I think. We used smart cards. Then we had all these cool devices and then a USB smart card reader and a lot of cabling you had to carry. So that wasn't really a cool user experience. So we changed into virtual smart cards. We played with a lot of different ways to protect our identities. I never had, when I was at Microsoft, a username password only. These days, we are almost passwordless. You still get one when you get onboarded, but we use FIDO2 tokens, we use Windows Hello for Business, and we have a fairly sophisticated process to onboard users in an international, non-physical office environment, if you want. So that side was actually fairly good when we talked about identity. The challenge was devices. And there was the point we played with IPsec authentication. We used NAP-NAC, so network access control and network access protection. But we kind of failed really protecting our environment that way. And this led us, I'd like to, yeah, now it worked. This led us to actually take a step back and say we need to assume that our network is compromised. And I was recently asked by a customer, so how do you make sure that we don't have any spies in our environment? Well, we have 250,000 employees, so the probability that the spy is in there is close to 1. So we have to assume that we have bad actors on our network. We have to assume that any of my colleagues, including me, maybe someone down the road opens this darn phishing email and gets compromised. Now, phishing doesn't work anymore the way it did in the past when you're passwordless, but installing malware, trying to circumvent certain controls, we need to assume that that happened. And for me these days, even when I was at CISO, and that's about 10 years ago, that's a given that you need to assume breach. I still see too many customers not thinking along those lines. And that's one of the things. If there is just one thing you take away from this session is assume breach. Now, everything else, everything I'm going to tell you from here on actually grounds in assume breach. So if you assume that the user is compromised, this actually means that you have to verify explicitly. So each and every time I access a resource, I need to verify that I'm me. I need to verify that I'm in a location where I'm allowed to access those resources. In our case, I need to verify that I'm sitting on a managed device which is policy compliant, and I'm coming back to that. And if this holds true, we need to make sure that the same holds true for our admins. So there's no standing admin right within Microsoft. So I have an awful delay when I click, so let me go back. So there's no standing admin access at Microsoft. There is the right to get elevated privileges, but there's no way I can actually keep my admin rights. And that's true for code access as well. For example, you've shown the ad in the Google Chrome browser. If I want to push code into production, well, I can't, I don't get those rights. But if I want to push code into production, I have to sit on a special machine. I get the special account with a smart card then, so usability is less important than security in this context. And then we even do a check for localization, how do we call it? A check for proximity. So am I actually sitting at the machine, or is Andre, I think you're sitting in Berlin, holding my second factor and just approving the logon because we are talking to each other? So the moment we get into high privileged activities, those things kind of kick off. So when we started, and now I come to that slide you've seen already, when we started, we talked about different things. We started with identity. So the journey for me always starts with identity. Once we've done identity, we added the device in a monitoring mode. So we try to understand if we enforce managed devices, what are we going to break? And that took us a while. We had back then to accept all Linux devices. We solved that problem in the meantime. We had a few scenarios which we are going to break. A big challenge up until today are developer workstations. We are currently moving them towards dev boxes, so virtualized devices which we can actually manage, and so on and so forth. And once you've done that, you need to make sure that your services, your applications actually adhere to these policies. And then we added, besides the least privileged access, that's the thing which you can hardly read at the bottom. We used a lot of telemetry to understand what's actually going on, which applications generate most Active Directory requests, and so on. So that was kind of the start of our journey. Now, one of the things which obviously makes it easier, and we integrated the two journeys together, is our migration to the cloud. Now, to be completely clear, even in our case, it wasn't a smooth migration. Don't feel that just because you're working at Microsoft, everybody just jumped on the cloud wagon and said, hooray, now I get rid of everything I had. It might be shocking for you, but they're humans working at Microsoft, and they have the same feelings as you have. It's way cooler to run my machine onto the desktop. I want to own my machine, my servers. I don't trust the cloud because that's another team operating the cloud, and so on. So we kind of had a fairly smooth migration to the cloud up to about 50% of our workloads. And from there on, it started to get difficult up to the point where Satya Nadella, our CEO, and Amy Hood, our CFO, decided on a plan to close down our internal data centers. And then when you're working at Microsoft, you have two options. Either you get out of the data center or you have lights off. And that helped to move into the cloud. Today, we are, and by the way, we decommissioned about 30% of our apps on that journey. Today, we are around 93, 95, 97% cloud. Depends a little bit whom you ask. There is certain stuff on-prem, which is, we have some legacy still. What we have as well is everything we need for business continuity. So it would be kind of stupid if the business continuity for Azure would run on Azure. So if the cloud goes down, we need bootstrapping technology and so on, and that's gonna reside on-prem, I guess, for the near future. I talked about adding devices to it. We never had a big problem with work from home during COVID because that was a setup we had already. We are enforcing endpoint protection. So one statement which is key, I said we added devices in a monitoring mode. Today, I can't access any Microsoft resource without the managed device. there's just one exception, which is Exchange Online. If I access non-classified emails and emails without any attachments. And the reason for that is just the emergency channel if we need to if we need to reach out to an employee who has a problem and sitting, I don't know, in Ouagadougou. So we need a way to get there. But for everything else, you need to have a managed device. And if you were really careful the way I framed it, I never talked about who owns the device. I'm actually sitting at the moment on a bring your own device if you want. That's my machine, but it's managed by Microsoft. And the same is true basically for my mobile phone. So that had a huge impact on our network. We had a classical network. We had different, so it wasn't as flat as it's shown in here. We had different segments. We managed the corporate network. So when I was going to an office, basically I was on a managed client network. And the same was true for the privileged access workstations. So these high secure, special hardware, tamper-proof thingies. We never tunneled, by the way, our cloud traffic through the on-prem network. We always had that directly connected to the cloud. Now, if you assume breach, and if you take assume breach seriously, it's fairly obvious that you basically can give up the client network because it's breached anyway. And if you ever did pen testing, red teaming, in most cases, it's fairly easy to break the client's network perimeter because I need just one user opening the malicious email and I'm in, because the machine connects to me. And we always called HTTP the Universal Firewall Tunneling Protocol, which you can have in a secure version. That's HTTPS. So we moved our clients, and that's about a 2 years project, off our on-prem managed corporate network onto managed and unmanaged internet. So if I come with a managed device, I'm sitting on a managed internet access, even if I'm on a Microsoft estate. I just get an internet access. If you are sitting in a Microsoft office, you're going to get onto an unmanaged internet environment. So basically the same thing. We are just separated, and in our case, we keep the forensic signals. We still kept back then our servers on-prem in most cases. If I'm sitting on an unmanaged device and need to access Microsoft resources, I use a managed virtual desktop. And the same is actually true for external people. And either they always get an account from us, so consultants or so. They either get a device from us or use managed virtual desktop. You can only do that, obviously, because we are passwordless. Because I don't have to enter my password on a potentially compromised guest workstation. That would mean we would have lost our identities. So that's kind of the option for unmanaged devices. And now basically the big challenge comes for most people. If you move the devices off your network, your applications need to be internet facing. So you use an application proxy and make the applications internet facing, and your perimeter becomes the identity is your perimeter. Now that's emotionally a huge step, but if you think about assume breach, if you think about the client being compromised anyway on your client network, your application was already internet facing, just with this hop of your employee. So basically that's not new. And we looked at VPN access. We wanted to make sure that we use VPN as little as possible. And then we moved everything into the cloud. We still have different setups, different subscriptions for business critical applications. We separate high impact IoT, OT like life safety, or the OT devices for our data centers. We separate them off from the normal office, and so on and so forth. We still have legacy. If you have legacy applications, we just have a few left. But if you use protocols like NTLM or LM hash, so the ones you can ask ChatGPT how to compromise them, you can. I tried. You firewall those applications, but don't forget the firewall. You need to manage the firewall. That's currently the only way forward, except using then the network again. So at the end of the day, what we have and where we want to end up is what we call adaptive access control. So I have different set of identities, normal enterprise accounts up to the highly privileged accounts like admins. We separated specialized accounts off. That's HR, CFO, finance all up, and so on. And the same we do with devices. So if you have access to our financial data, you have a specialized device and a specialized account, which is both more hardened than my overall normal account. If you're an admin, you have a privileged device, that's special hardware, and a special privileged account with smart cards. So that's kind of the setup we have these days. And one final word from my side. One thing we learned is when we moved off passwords, the bad guys started to go for the tokens. So it's hard to phish somebody. Let's try to get the token. Token is valid for 7-8 hours, I guess, in your case. In our case, it's now 1. So we want to make sure, especially for cloud resources, that when we disable an account, we immediately make sure that you lose access to an application. As we can't rely on all the SaaS services we use SAP, we use Concur, we use ServiceNow, we use ours. We added the network layer into that. So we use Entra Internet Access to kind of create a tunnel to Office 365, ServiceNow, Concur, and so on. And if my account gets disabled, the tunnel immediately drops and I have to re-authenticate. That's where the network actually comes back to protect us against token theft and especially make sure we get in this continuous access evaluation. And that's one of the reasons why we developed Entra Internet Access and Entra Private Access. So that was our journey in about 15 minutes, 18 minutes, and I'll go back to you, Andre.
Thank you very much, Roger. That was very exciting to see that. There are a couple of questions coming in. We will cover them in a second. I just want to come back what I presented before. Just a small piece to add here, to bring a little bit of awareness into one aspect. To really have a strong security posture for different topics you covered, it's crucial that these components sharing information, talking to each other. There are a couple of upcoming standards that are, from my perspective, really very important to build up a strong zero trust environment. I would like to explain them briefly, but also show them a little bit of the complexity and approaches to tackle that. So one is a continuous access evaluation profile, so a standard that is the OpenID Foundation is working on. That is helping in that scenario in which you, for instance, not having just one identity provider, for instance, Entra ID, but maybe other huge ecosystem, for instance, SAP. And in these scenarios, it's quite important that you are able to deal with the situation in that, for instance, you have to revoke a session as claim information or assurance level when it comes to authentication changes. Or, for instance, a device that was compliant during authentication is not compliant anymore. And now coming to the second aspect of the RISC standard as part of the shared signals working group. So that's RISC incident sharing and coordination that goes deep to topics like, for instance, recovery has been activated for account. For instance, you are using maybe Apple sign in and would like to leverage that information that account recovery was triggered for that account, because that might impact you within your organization, within the services you provide for that person. Doesn't matter if it's a customer, if it's an employee, if it's a supplier. So a lot of integrations has to take place to really fulfill that kind of zero trust journey. And therefore, I now would like to come back to the picture shown before to help you a little bit how to navigate through that and develop the understanding where is an organization you're today and what are steps you might take to move on into other areas of or into other zero trust pillars or other faces when it comes to cybersecurity. So typically Entra ID is it in with its very core is a service to protect on the identity layer. But from my point of view, the exciting part is really this strong integration and cover into other areas. For instance, when it comes to the Entra ID protection capabilities, that helps you to understand the threat landscape around users, for instance, because a user might get risky because there are information on the darknet when it comes to account information, or the other direction when it comes to detecting, responding to the to an attack, because maybe you have a little bit of legacy Active Directory running around. That should be the case for for many organizations. Then being able to understand that right now an attack is ongoing and responding to that before any harm is done. And this moves on into all the other layers as well. For instance, having good understanding about what devices are actually in use, managing them. Really liked as an approach, Roger, you mentioned. Doesn't matter if you're talking about company owned or user owned, but making sure that at least a level of control and visibility is there in order to allow access to IT resources and assets of the organization. And that goes, of course, hand in hand then with Defender capabilities, and moving on into the segment of detecting, responding based on the Sentinel, moving into the network layer, using a GSA from different perspectives to understand, for instance, that there's a risk associated with accessing SaaS services to be able to detect that kind of token theft attack we were talking about in the beginning, or moving on into the area of privileged access, and so on and so forth. There are so many more things to add here, but in order to allow us to discuss now a few questions, I'm not going to fill all the other boxes here on that matrix. So therefore, let's jump a little bit into the questions, and I would like to mention a few of them. Roger, I think here's one question that is related to the journey you explained before, and this is: how long did it take to Microsoft to implement Zero Trust? We are doing a Zero Trust project, 6 months, bring in Zscaler, and then we are done. Yeah? So this, I think, is referring a little bit to what you were saying at the beginning, right?
I think you'll never be done. We started about, I would say, 8 years ago, 7 years ago. The concept of zero trust, which roots in the assume breach and then verify explicitly least privileged access, is a concept you can pull through your whole architecture. We started with user identities. We started in the cloud. That's kind of the first step we did when we migrated to Office 365. Well, then it has to be older. And then we added devices. Then we started to look into IoT devices, smart meeting rooms, what have you. An important point you made, which I didn't make, is you need to modernize your security operations center as well. And that's an important thing which we kind of pulled in parallel, because when I think back, when I was CISO, the SOC was reporting to me, and my analysts were brilliant in all the network technologies. So they were brilliant when they looked at TCP/IP. I sometimes felt like they're reading hex dumps when they looked at TCP/IP. And all of a sudden, most of your signals are coming from a device which is not connected to your proxy anymore. So my device becomes my own network segment. So the signals come from outside your network. The signals come from your identity provider. So a lot of things are going to change. So you need to modernize both. How long does it take you? I think we stopped talking about zero trust and went into ransomware protection because we figured out it's actually the same thing. It's about protecting identity. It's about protecting devices. It's about assuming breach. It's about reducing the blast radius. It's kind of the same things behind it. For me, zero trust is a mindset. It's an architectural concept, if you want, but it's not a project and then you're done. Someone you're going to rename it sometimes, and you know, it helps if you brand it initially, because what I see fairly often is when a customer wants to start a journey, there are a lot of pushbacks from the network team, from you know, we always protected the. I built castles in the past, you know, walls and water around it, the bridges and all that kind of stuff. So you get a lot of pushback from these old people like me. And then once the project or the program starts, you get budget, and then you have a lot of friends within the organization, because everybody wants to join the bandwagon, and someone it's going to go down. So for us, let's say a decade is probably not completely wrong, but we are not done yet. I mean, zero trust will probably continue to be with us. What's your experience in this context when you work with customers, Andre?
Yeah, of course I can second your point. So organizations are structured, right? So there's a hierarchy, there are departments, and sometimes there's a situation that you described also before. There's a little bit of, do I have the trust into my colleagues that they're doing the job right? Of course, I should have. Sometimes that is not really the case, right? And then there's a kind of siloed working in silos and not sharing information, not sharing the same vision. So from my point of view, it's zero trust is really a leadership topic. So it is bringing the organization together, motivating to go into the same direction in order to build trust. Yeah? Not trusting that particular device, a particular user, putting the boundaries in place, but really that you can work again together in a trustful way. So it's a leadership topic, and it's really something what has to be taken serious on a very high level inside the organization. Yeah? Otherwise, there will not be that result that we really need to
Yeah,
improve
you
the
make a good
security.
remark. I mean, the identity team is responsible for protecting the identities. The devices team is responsible for protecting the devices, and so on. You might have a data governance team if you're lucky, and so on and so forth. And you know, all of a sudden these have to work together, and that's something you need to do, because the attacker doesn't care whether it's the easiest way to compromise the device or the identity, or whether I get direct access to the data. If you think back at the incident we had, it's now 1.5 years ago, with the Russian national intelligence, they didn't even touch any user identity to start with. They came in through a completely different tunnel. So, and that's kind of bringing all the people together.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Because I think it's quite obvious if you look to that kind of attack path as move on. Maybe it's starting with a phish credential, and then the device, then it's happening. The next step is happening on the device, but device get compromised, access to a couple of things around there, and then it's moving again to the identity layer and so on and so forth. Okay, there are many other questions, so let's look into that. So one question, very fast and easy to answer. We'll take that one. Will there be a recording provided to you? Yes, that will be the case. Absolutely. So then we have one question. How can we integrate SailPoint PAM solution with Entra to enable zero trust? And I think that's a situation couple of your organizations have. So having different solutions from different vendors in place. And there's, from my point of view, SailPoint is very strong on working with live cycle joiner, mover, lever, access request, recertification in place, and of course capabilities into PAM. And on the other hand, Entra is perfectly when it comes to enforcing multi-factor authentication with different flavors. I think we covered these kind of things, and also analyzing, understanding signals, understanding the threat landscape. And the good thing is that there are standards around to do integrations. What I really love in working with Entra is a very, very mighty graph API that allows you to do everything, but it's not working via out-of-the-box integrations. So from that point of view, there are well, depending on what exactly you want to integrate, there should be a couple ways of doing that in a very, very efficient way. So then we have another one. So what about Active Directory, Entra Connect, and the old world in Zero Trust? I think attackers are using the easiest way. Is there a tiering model needed to implement? That's a good one. Roger, would you want to start?
The concepts hold true whether you are on-prem, in the cloud, modern, OT, or not OT. If you think about my three slides or points at the beginning. Now, I think the big shift I've seen with hybrid setups and let's frame it legacy AD is that we started to turn the direction where authentication happens. Initially, when people moved into Entra, they used on-prem AD. They did pass-through authentication, something like that. So Entra wanted to authenticate, it handed over the authentication request to on-prem. Most customers turned that in the meantime. So they use actually the modern authentication in the backend to authenticate to the on-prem environment. One of the things, if you can't do that for any reasons, or you can't move off legacy authentication, shield them off with firewalls. Do that. I know that it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. And use something like Entra private access to do a targeted, not VPN tunnel, but a targeted tunnel to your application, which is then built on modern authentication. That's the only way, in my opinion, to protect these kind of workloads. If you're heavy on-prem, then you should look into your applications broader. So there are ways to it depends a little bit, how legacy or authentication technology is, but there is a lot of technology available to help you to migrate away from Active Directory on-prem, enable those applications to use Entra ID, or at least have kind of a, let's say, patch on top of that. I didn't say that, like the Entra private access or what have you. That's the way I would go.
So from my point of view, the Zero Trust network access, that's exactly the reason why we need to have it to deal with that kind of legacy, with that kind of on-prem, because very often there are a lot of applications out there that rely still on NTLM, but hopefully not anymore, but Kerberos, and there is a kind of situation in which ZTNA can provide a lot of value in going then for Entra GSA. I think that's a kind of way how to tackle that. Just want to add one other aspect to the conversation, as it's complex, the resources are limited. I think it is important to have a good understanding of the risk landscape you have. By having a good risk management in place, you can then really figure out what are the kind of areas in which you have to bring mitigations in place to reduce the likelihood, to reduce the impact in case something happens, and then really building a roadmap on top of that. And as you said, put a patch on it where it is required, or finding a solution that allows you to survive the next years until you get rid of it. Yeah. But not an easy thing. Obviously, it's easier to say that than to do it. So there are many other questions. So let's pick another one here. So you started with the NIST framework. How is Microsoft Zero Trust reflected in the NIST framework and vice versa?
It's actually not Microsoft Zero Trust. It's if you look at the frameworks, being it NIST, being it the Open Group, being it our approach, basically they are almost the same conceptually. You have a policy decision point, which is the identity provider. You get signals from identity from the endpoint. You have a policy enforcement point, which depends a little bit on the model, network heavy companies say that's the network. We obviously say it's more it's either Entra or your application. So you can fairly easily take Open Group, NIST, and if you want our slides, if you want to put it on that level, and kind of put them on top of each other, and you almost match. So, and it's not that surprising, because if you think back again, if you assume breach, I want to have explicit verification. Where do I pass by when I access a resource? Well, the resource needs to authenticate me, so we have the policy decision point. So it's actually state of today, and that might change in 2 years, but state of today, a fairly natural way of thinking of the next level of the architecture. And for me, they are kind of all of them are kind of a different shade of the same question.
Yeah, so what I really like, it's what we were saying at the beginning, is it's about that one single aspect of assuming breach. The attacker is inside your organization, and then somehow think about the logical steps. How would you behave if you know he's right now there? And then it's really about these kind of things. Of course, we have to apply least privilege. Of course, we have to have network isolation or segmentation in place, and all these kind of things. They are kind of a logical consequence of that very first idea of assuming breach. And there's of course different ways and how to describe that. But at the end of the day, they are not contradictory. It's somehow kind of different perspectives. Yeah, really depending on what is the kind of background of the persons that were working on that one. But it's doesn't matter which approach you follow, it as long as you're taking one of these frameworks and working on that, I would say. So a couple of more questions. So here's one question: do AI help and protect our identity or not? No session today without talking about AI.
It's fairly simple.
So,
In my opinion, it's simple. Security is a data problem these days. And just to give you a flavor, we are currently collecting about 40 petabytes of threat intelligence a day, 40. That's kind of the data volume we get hitting our cloud when you look at threat intelligence. You're not going to manage that without AI. So does AI help? Definitely it does, because we have the better data than the bad guys. And AI helps us to drive, for example, a conditional access decision. That's not Gen AI. I'm not talking about ChatGPT or GPT-4 or what have you. Basically, if you're using conditional access in the P2 version, you're using AI since ever. Yes, it definitely helps.
I think that's always good to separate a little bit about talking about that kind of machine learning approaches. They are in the security for so many years now, yeah, because you can't build up that kind of decision tree to detect the attack in a manual way. That's just not scaling at all. When it comes to Gen AI, I would say we have a couple of flavors there. First of all, attackers use it massively, and in order to keep up with that, yeah, it's also required to bring in these capabilities also in defending against that, and also having in mind that complexity is increasing. At the same time, simple attacks don't disappear. They are easier accessible to attackers, so requires a kind of broader knowledge. And from my point of view, there are different aspects in which also Gen AI helps. There, of course, co-pilot functionalities and a lot of things that really makes it easier accessible to get answer out of documentation is already there. So it's about productivity, and we need that in the security world in order to keep up with the attackers, right? Okay, so a couple of more questions. We won't be able to go through all of them. I hope we can provide some answers.
There's one I can answer fairly fast. Can we enable continuous authentication on-prem ID? when it comes to continuous access evaluation, that's a function the application has to follow. So each time you hit my application, I want to check whether your token is still valid or not. And this functionality is only built in my understanding, into Entra, so not into AD. But to be clear, if you're not using the network, the application has to go back to the directory and say, is the token still valid? And did you issue the token? Those are the two key questions. So was the token not forged?
Okay, great. So then we have another one. Oh, wow. I swear, I could see in a preview that Copilot helps to create workflows in Entra ID governance. It is live. Um,
Oh, I don't know,
um,
but I've seen the same.
uh, um, so, um, well, I can at least add one thing to that. So I think an important aspect when it comes to Entra ID governance is that that in case you need something on top of that, you can easily do that with logical apps, with Power Automate, for instance. And for Power Automate, it's obviously working to create workflows with GenAI, with the Copilot. So that's one direction. And yeah, then but otherwise, I'm really excited to
No, no.
see the direct
Copilot
impact of
able to help you to create the workflows as well. So you say, I want to have a user onboarding, this experience, and so on. And Copilot helps you to create the workflow. I've seen that working. I'm not sure whether it's still in preview or in production. That's something. Sorry, I'm living in previews and I'm not in the Entra team, so I don't know at the moment.
Okay. All right. So what will we have here? What's the vision and strategy of Microsoft in terms of identity governance, administration, access management? Is a central IGA-IAM solution not needed in the future on top of Entra?
So identity governance will be integrated in the whole, or is in the process of being integrated, however you want to put it, into the whole Intras. Now I have to be careful with terms. In the whole Intra world, that's probably the most neutral one. So identity governance is part of it, and there's a lot of investment going into this direction. So do we need something on top of it? I hope not going forward. A lot of processes can be built today already. Others we are working on. So it should be part of Entra going forward.
Mm. Yeah, maybe to add on that. So based on that picture I've shown with the different dimensions and the pillars, I think it's quite obvious that you want to go for a platform approach, and as less as you have to add on top of that, that's of course reducing complexity. And I would say one of the strengths of is the large ecosystem around that, yeah, with solutions, for instance, in the marketplace that help to move functionality a little bit further in areas in which it is required. Yeah. So unfortunately, we were not able to go through all these questions, Roger, but I hope we can provide a few answers together with the recording. And it's great to see that there's so much interaction questions to that what we presented. So I like that a lot. Roger, any closing notes from
Famous last
your
word.
side?
Ah, famous last words. So for me, it's fairly obvious, and we made that statement so often: MFA, 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 and multi-factor authentication. Go passwordless if you can. Add your device, and that's a natural consequence. And I know that I repeat myself of the assume breach, and live with assume breach. Make sure you really accept assume breach, and if you take it from there, you actually follow through most of the things. The second point is, and you see more technology coming not only on the identity side along that way, security is becoming a data problem, the longer the more, and not the data you protect, but they're talking about metadata. and AI will definitely help us to get ahead of the bad guys. I'm really convinced, and then I shut up, but I'm really convinced the first time in my career we have a big opportunity to get ahead of the bad guy because we are able to leverage one thing. We get the data of our infrastructure. We have that. We just need to leverage it, and we have the technology to do that going forward. So
Very
thank
good.
you for
Thanks.
that, Andre.
Thanks a lot. So my take is really be aware that zero trust is not a project. It's a journey. It's a long journey. It's a never-ending journey. At least we can't see the end of that journey right now. It is required doing that, but I'm absolutely second your point. I think we have a lot of tools in place to bring together all things that require to really bring that forward, moving into a more agile world, but also a more resilient world when it comes to protecting against attacks. But for that, it is really required that we're not thinking in silos, but that we are working jointly together between departments, business units, cross company to make that happen. It is required, but I'm confident that we will able to make that and are not ending up in a situation in which is no trust anymore and attackers are taking over companies on a daily basis. So, Roger, thank you very much for having that session together with us. It was really fun. I enjoyed it, and thank you to the audience for bringing up all these questions, comments. Much appreciated, and yeah, have a great day, everybody.